Saucy Bites.
So recently, I've been working on coding a Python application that would help automate a lot of tasks that are today being done completely manually for our Skytap environment. And specifically, when we have training events, there are a lot of manual and tedious steps that have historically been being done per event. And so this utility that I've created will essentially automate all of those tasks. So as you can see here, I have the Skytap automation dashboard, and I have a series of buttons here for the different tools that I've created for this particular application. Now, in Skytap, as an example, we have a project here. We'll call this BRR test, but this could be, for example, a training event. And then within this project, we have one environment, and in this case, we have the master image. So what we're going to do is we want to be able to create, let's say, for example, 5 copies of this image for 5 students that will be taking a class. Normally, the way I would have to do this is I would open up this image, and then I would click a copy button. I'd have to wait a few seconds for it to initiate a copy, and then I would come back and do the same thing again, but I would do that 5 times. What we can do now with the Skytap automation dashboard that I've created is simply put the information into a form and then put in the number of copies we want, and then it will create those number of copies. So we need 2 pieces of information to do this. And if we go back to the utility here, we'll see that the first application is create environment copies. So if I click on this, you can see that I have some brief description here that the utility is used to make copies of an existing Skytap environment. And you'll see that we need project ID, master environment ID, the number of copies that we want to make, and then a name prefix. So for the project ID, what we'll do is we'll come over to Skytap, and we'll see in the URL here that we have our project ID. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that, and then I'll come over into our app and I'll paste it in. Now the master environment ID, if we go ahead and click on this image, we'll see in the URL we have our ID number. So we're going to go ahead and copy that value out as well. And we're going to paste that into the master environment ID field. And then under number of copies, desired copies, we're going to put in 5 for this example. And then the name prefix, the way this is set up is that the code will issue to the API post a specific name prefix. And then I've asked it to essentially do an incrementing number. So for example, if we do training class, what it will do is it will use training class hyphen, and then it will auto increment based on a number cycle. For example, 01, 02, 03, etc. So now that we've put this information in here, we can go ahead and click the Create Environment Copies button. Okay, so if you see here, we can see that we've successfully updated the name for copy of training class 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, and then those environments have all been added to our project. So we've created our copies and we've moved them into that particular Skytap project. So if we come over to Skytap now and we go back to the project and we do a reload on this project, we'll see our images here, training class 01, 02, 03, 04, 05. So now the next step would be that we need to do some post-copy configurations. And I'll kind of highlight what those are. So for example, if I come into training class 01, we'll notice that this auto shutdown feature underneath automation is set to on. And if we open that up, we'll see that basically right now it's configured to suspend this environment after 2 hours of not using it. So what we want to do is we actually want to disable these power options because we're going to create schedulers for them. So the first step is we're disabling all the power. Second step is we're going to create a scheduler for each of the environments. And then after the scheduler is created, we're going to look up the URL for each of the environments so that we can then provide the person running the class with a list of instance names and URLs that they can then share with each of their students. So that's what this next step is going to take care of. So we're going to go ahead and click on Post Copy Configurations. And then we're going to first off specify a time zone. So for example, this class will put the time zone in as Rome. And then we're going to click on Start Date, and we'll say, let's do the 8th of May. And then the start time. Typically, the person requesting the training event is going to provide the start and end times each day for the training class. So let's say, for example, they asked for the machines to be up at 10 a.m. in the Rome time zone. What I usually do is I start an hour earlier. So I'll go back to 9 o'clock a.m. instead of the current time here. And I'll just say 9 o'clock a.m. And then end date is going to be, let's just say, for example, May 12th. And then the end time, what I usually do for the end date and end time is I will go 1 day beyond what they requested. So in this case, let's pretend they wanted to end on the 11th. I'll just put it to the 12th. And then at that point, I can pick any time for the end time, and it doesn't really matter which one I pick. So I'll just go ahead and pick that one. Next, we need to specify how many hours per day this particular environment needs to run. This is something that the person running the class will also provide. And so we'll just say, for example, in this case, we're going to do 7 hours per day. And then the final piece of information that we need to provide is our project ID again. So I'm going to go back to Skytap because I don't have it copied here, but I'm going to go in and I'm going to get my project ID. And I'm going to come back and paste that in here. And then what days of the week do we want this scheduler to run? And so I'm just going to say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. And if before I do this, if I come into one of the environments, you're going to notice that underneath automation where it says schedules, there is no schedulers associated with it. So part of what this script is going to do is it's going to actually create the schedulers for us. Also, if I go over to Skytap schedules, you'll see that I don't have any schedules for those environments yet. So I'm going to come back over here and then I'm going to click submit. Now the script is going to go out in the background and do all of the steps that I mentioned, including disabling the power options. It's then going to go through and it's going to make updates to create schedulers. And then it's also going to gather a list of all of the environments and the URLs that those environments are accessible at. And you'll see down on the bottom here that we retrieved our environment IDs and names, just like I just mentioned. We modified the power settings for all of those environments. We gathered the URLs for all of them. And then we created schedulers. And you can see essentially the JSON data that was sent to the Skytap API for each environment. So now if we come over to this instance, training class 01, for example, where we have auto shutdown set to on and 0 schedules, if we refresh this now, we now see that the auto shutdown is set to off, and now there is one schedule associated with this particular environment. So if we go back out to our project and look at all of the environments we have here now, if this script worked properly, we should now be able to see that all of these environments' power options have been set to off. So that's where we can check the suspend states. That's what this job is for. So if I click on check suspend states, and then I put in my project ID, and then click check details, it's going to go out and query this project and pull back information on what all of the suspend states are set to. And right now, for all of the images in that project, they are now set to disabled. Let's say, for example, they weren't set to disabled. So I'll come back over here and I'll go into, let's like training class 01, for example. And I'm going to go under auto shutdown where it's currently set to off. And I'm going to enable it. And I'm going to say, after 4 hours, shut the machine down. And I'll say save. So now if I come back to the dashboard and I rerun this check details for the suspend states, it should come back and show me that one of the environments now has a different status. And you can see training class 01 now says after 4 hours of idle time, it will auto suspend. So let's say, for example, I want to be able to, from this dashboard, just quickly go through a project and again, disable all of the power states. So what I can do there is I can go to set power options, and then I put in my project ID, and I say disable power options. And it will go out and essentially disable all of the power options for the environments in that particular project. And we'll see that the power options have been disabled for the requested environments. So to finish this use case, if I come back to check suspend states and click check details now, they should all say disabled. And as we see, they all say disabled. Now you may remember when we did the post copy configurations job, it actually created schedulers for each of the environments. So if we come over to our schedules within Skytap and do a reload here, we're going to see that we now have some scheduler jobs here. So for example, we had the master image, and you can see that it starts at May 8th at 9 a.m. in the Rome time zone, and it's going to go every day, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, until the 12th of May. And you can see that it starts at 9 a.m. Now, one of the idiosyncrasies of Skytap and the way our account is set up is that they have a model called rate limiting. And basically what that means is any function on Skytap that takes up a significant amount of resources, such as powering on or suspending an environment, we can only do, I believe there's a total of 4 simultaneous tasks. Otherwise, our account will get a rate limit put on it, and it will essentially delay and queue up a bunch of jobs that are currently being requested. So what I've done is I've put in the code to build in a 10-minute buffer for every 2 instances that schedulers are created for. So you can see that this first one starts at 9 a.m., and then training class 01 starts at 9 a.m., then training class 02 isn't going to start until 9:10, so there's a 10-minute buffer in there. Training class 03 is getting 9:10 as well. Training class 04 is getting 9:20. Training class 05 is getting 9:20 as well. So we can see that the schedulers have been successfully created. And then finally, one of the other things that the post copy configurations job did is it actually sends an email to me so that I can then provide a list to the trainer of all of the instance names and the URLs that will be unique to each instance that they can give to each of their students. And so you can see here that I have an email that came in with a CSV file attached. And if I go ahead and just do a preview of this CSV, you can see that it has the instance name in the first column, and then it has the unique URLs in the second column. And basically, we would just provide this list to the person running the training event. Now, let's say, for example, we want to take a look at the usage that is taking place within a particular project. So we have our project ID here, and the last tool we have is the project usage report. So I can go ahead and click on that, and I can come over to project ID and just paste my project ID in, and then say generate report. And essentially what this will do is it will put together a report of the instance names, the URLs to the instances, who owns them, and when the environments were last run. And you can see here, for example, that because we just created these items, none of them have been run before. The master image has been run previously, and the last time it was run was on April 24th. Now, what this utility will be useful for is it will allow us who manage Skytap to, for example, go into a project that maybe has a lot of environments and easily be able to pull a report of when systems were or weren't run last. And then we're able to follow up with the owners of those instances to find out if we can delete them to clean up and conserve resources on Skytap. And one of the other cool things about this particular one is it will actually send us a report that has a list in the email body as well as an attached CSV file. So we can now easily share this with resource owners to include them in an email thread, essentially, to determine whether or not an environment can be decommissioned and deleted or if they still need to use it. So as you can see, this dashboard provides a lot of functionality, and it saves me now hours and hours of manual, tedious tasks just by clicking a few buttons. Thank you. To quickly do a review of the code, essentially what happened was I created these utilities about a month ago, and they were all individual Python scripts, and I was only able to run one of them at a time. And so I was frustrated because I wanted to be able to create a landing page that had buttons that would then allow me to click on the buttons and launch the appropriate tool. Originally, because I didn't know about blueprints within Flask, what I did was I assigned unique port numbers to each of the apps, and then I essentially created a shell script that would launch all of the applications at the same time. And I created an index.html that then pointed each button to the application running on a particular port number. I very quickly realized that that's probably not the best way to do it. So what I did was I consulted my friend ChatGPT, and I watched a couple of YouTube videos, and I was able to actually figure out how to put this together. So essentially what we have is the Flask is what we're using for our web application framework. And within Flask, you have blueprints. And so the blueprints are basically all of those individual modular components that I had coded previously. I've turned those into blueprints, and I'm essentially making those blueprints available to my main application here. And you can see, for example, from my main application, I'm using a template to control how that main application is going to look. And you can see that it's the main/index.html. So for the file structure over here, you can see that I have my main.py and my credentials.py file at the root. And then I have a blueprints folder and a templates folder. Underneath the blueprints folder is where I have each of my individual applications. So the create copies, the post configuration script, the check suspend states, the set the power options, and the usage report. That's where all of those apps are contained, is under blueprints. Each of them also, just like the main file here, uses a template to control what you see on the web page and the styling for that. And that's underneath the templates folder. And then underneath the templates folder, I have subdirectories for each of the applications, each of the blueprints. So for example, under create copies, I have the copies.html. So if we take a quick look at, for example, the create copies, the first thing I want to point out is how you actually take your Python script that you had previously and turn it into a blueprint. So for example, you can see here that in my import statements, I'm now importing blueprint from Flask. Second, I came in and I defined create_copies equals blueprint. And then I gave it create_copies here and then the name there. And then basically what you do is you take that information and you come back to your main application, and then you essentially do an import from your blueprints of the particular blueprint that you created within your Python application. The other thing that you have to do is within your actual Python application itself, you probably had something like an app.route. Well, you basically have to change that and point it to your blueprint name. So in this case, I have at create_copies.route / at create_copies.route / submit form, etc. So once I figured out the mechanics of how those things had to work, it was pretty easy to get things taken care of within the other files as well. You'll see that this is the code that we're using for our Python application. You can see that I am rendering the template copies.html from the create_copies template folder. And then you can see the code here that is being executed to do that particular job. And for example, I've commented here, step 1, create copies. So it's going to use this particular API URL for Skytap. It's going to use a username and password that I have defined in my credentials file. And then it's essentially going to go out and create those copies, and it's going to ultimately update the names and then add those environments to a project, and then it outputs the information like you saw in the demo. So each of the applications are set up and configured like this. And then if we open up, for example, the template that is being used for copies, You can see that I have some CSS styling that I've embedded in the HTML directly, and that's controlling the look and feel of the actual page. Then you can see that we have our actual form HTML here that has all of our input fields as well as the button. And then we have some JavaScript that controls what happens when we click on that particular button. So it's a pretty clean footprint, if you will. And what it allows you to do using blueprints within Flask is you can keep all of your individual applications modular so that you can work on a particular piece, and let's say somebody else is working on another piece, and it doesn't really impact the main application itself.